What it do? Welcome to the Three Dudes Fantasy Football Show. JJ Buck, Steven Masterson, Aaron Hernandez with you, coming at you. We're going elite. We're going big. We're focusing on the top 30, the fantasy cornerstones, the players that you need on your roster because you need to hit on some of those elite players. We know we get in the season, we're talking waiver wire trades. But if you can land those right pieces at the top of the draft, that can be the difference. But gentlemen, what it do? How goes it on a beautiful 4th of July week?
What's going
It's good.
on?
How are you, buddy?
Yeah.
I am fantastic. I'm ready to go. Excited to get back at it. And, this time of year, and we've done the episodes, everyone's talking about sleepers, rookies, second year players. But the core of our fantasy teams are going to be the dudes that we know are good, we know are going to produce. But it's just kind of handling the right value out of it. And one of the things we're going to do in this episode is throw out some different scenarios, and we'll each give you our opinions of if you're drafting number one, you take Christian McCaffery, what do your next few picks look like? Or if you're at 5, what do your next 2 picks look like? If you have that swing pick, 10 and 11, what is your draft going to look like? And when you look at the ADP and Fantasy Pros ADP is what we're going to be looking at throughout this episode. They do a good job consensus of different fantasy football sites. Christian McCaffrey is a shoe-in as the number 1 overall pick. But before we go into the draft strategy, Steve, you don't think he's a surefire consensus number 1 overall pick? Like if you had the number 1 pick, you would think a little bit differently.
Yeah, so we were talking about this before. When you look at it, right, Christian McCaffrey going 1, which is fantastic, and he probably should go 1 because he's most likely the best player. However, how the drafts have started to play out, we're starting to see the running backs take this massive swing back, right? We've always played fantasy. It's like get 2 good running backs and take receivers. But if you have the number 1 pick, I'm not drafting again until pick 20. And at that point, I'm looking at wide receivers 15 and 16. I'm no longer looking at top 10 wide receivers. I'm looking at what most people would consider wide receiver 2s or 3s. So I don't necessarily know if I want to go Christian McCaffrey and then end up with 2 lesser wide receivers where I might be able to go CeeDee Lamb and take another wide receiver Jalen Waddle or Mike Evans, and then take Saquon Barkley and feel pretty confident in my team either way, but have a much better wide receiver. And if I'm starting the draft, I can kind of lead and do whatever I want.
Absolutely. And I do think when we start diving into the rankings, you are seeing a strong 0 running back swing where the wide receivers are absolutely getting pushed up the board. And if you have one of those top picks and you're not going to draft for a little while, 10, 12, even more team league in a snake format, like that is an absolute thing you need to think of. Because Christian McCaffrey, he's locked in on the field. He's going to be a top 3 running back for you this season. Even with Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco talking about trying to dial back some of his carries, he's a player that's too important to take off the field too much. So I think you are going to get the value. But when you present it that way, it really makes you think because wide receivers are getting pushed up. Yeah, you get Christian McCaffrey, but does that hurt you too much in the wide receiver market? So I'll throw it out there to you, Aaron. Let's say you take Christian McCaffrey number 1 overall. Like you're not messing around. You're not going to overthink. You have Christian McCaffrey number 1 overall. What are you then doing to try to back it up when you have those back-to-back picks when it comes back your way 20 and 21? Are you then hammering wide receivers? And then who do you like in that range?
Yeah, probably hammer wide receivers. It's actually, a great topic because, the league we're in, it's like I have Christian McCaffrey. My keepers, I'm not sure who it's going to be. So it's like, this is actually, a great topic for me because looking at it like how Steve described, it's like if Christian McCaffrey is going to be, my pick coming around at 20, we're looking at Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, Mike Evans, and I probably would go receiver because it's kind of getting a little desperate at that point. So, I mean, at that point, I'd probably, if Jalen Waddle's there, I'd probably go Jalen Waddle, maybe Mike Evans, but that's so tough for me right there to think of a good choice. There's Cooper Kupp a little bit further down, DK Metcalf. Looking at these rankings on Fantasy Pros, it's an interesting topic. So it's like,
well, you can always zig when everybody else is zagging too, right? Like you could take Christian McCaffrey and then go, I'm going to take Saquon Barkley and Mike Evans, and then I'll load up on, like you could go our traditional old school, 2015 draft, go running back.
So many options when you're actually looking at it, because there is a lot of depth for wide receiver and actually running back. So it's like you literally, like you said, you can zig or zag. So that's a great question.
Yeah, the running backs
I guess
kind of getting pushed down in value is, as much as I've talked about wanting to go, wide receiver heavy, and it's a PPR world, and seeing some of the big games you get, those 40, 50-point games, which can swing a weekend for you get from wide receivers. Like it's going to be hard when you're sitting there in the third round, even at the end of the second round, and you look at a Saquon Barkley and a Derrick Henry and guys of those ilk, and they're in better positions this year. And like I love Derrick Henry in Baltimore. They're going to run the football. He's going to have an opportunity to score touchdowns, even with Lamar Jackson in his rushing ability. Saquon Barkley is going to be a huge focal point of what the Eagles are doing. And that's why I think this strategy is going to be really fun to talk about, is where do you want to attack from number one? Do you want to go CMC or do you want to wait? And then you can still get elite wide receiver value and at least get one RB1. And I'm interested with you guys and kind of your draft strategy. I'll start with you, Steve. Do you, when you go in, are you kind of locked in when you put your board together and you're drafting based on like, all right, this is how I have it ranked, this is where I'm going? Are you more of a guy that you want to fill certain positions regardless? Like you want, hey, I want to make sure I have two good starting wide receivers and a running back. Are you just, where it falls, I fall on my board?
I always try to just let it fall how it falls, right? And fill my team out, because you should be able to, if you've been drafting with a league long enough, you probably know how trends are about to happen. So if you go into just, this is what I'm doing, a lot of the time you're not adapting to what the league around you is doing. So our league's a good example. Quarterbacks fall in our league. Well, I don't want to be the first one to grab one then, because if they're going to fall and I can get a great value late, why am I the one worried about getting a quarterback? So I just try to read the trend where I'm picking before. And then I'm weird and I'll count out how many picks are between my next pick and the pick I'm at. So if I go, or, wherever we're at. So if Aaron's picking and there's 4 picks before me, I try to have 5 players I like and rank those players in my head before it gets to me. So if these 2 fall to me, I'm going to take him. Or if all 4 players go, I have my 5th option, so that I'm never stuck and I'm not confused by the draft. So I never want to be the player who's sitting there going, oh, I need this person, and then if they're not there, I'm going to panic. I just want to make sure I know, okay, these are the 5 players I like. Are any of them going to be like 4 picks ahead? Okay, there's 5. I should get one of them. And then I'm never stressed during a draft. So I'm not worried as much about the player I need to take as much as filling out my draft and then making sure I don't get blindsided on a pick.
Yeah, and I think with
But
the amount of different leagues that people play in, and Aaron, I know you mentioned the challenges that you face in some of your different leagues. It's a thing to do, is count how many picks are in between. And so many of us in playing leagues for so long, we can kind of know the styles, but that's where you can get an edge, even in a league that you've been in for a long time, is being ready for that curveball. And how do you approach it when you have different draft styles, between leagues, and you have to, maybe you're doing some, research for this one league, but it might not even translate to that other league.
Yeah, that definitely happens, and it's a balancing act, and it kind of what Steve described. It's that balancing act. The league, the tendencies, kind of don't, really focus in too much on one player, because I know a lot of people do that. They're so into, getting their guy, but it's like you really need the adapts. You need adaptability, to kind of, make decisions on the fly, and it goes a lot faster than most people think for the newbies that get into fantasy. It's like, oh, it's already, my pick, and I've been, looking at this endlessly, all this research, and I still don't know, and it's my pick. You just don't want to end up there. You kind of want to have a plan on your league, and like Steve said, multiple players, kind of you counting, like how you said, positions, between your pick, and kind of getting like that. I work the same way, so it's definitely useful.
All right, we were talking
I
about.
mean, don't get me wrong. If you have 5 wide receivers, you don't want to take a 6th and have no running backs, right? So
You
there
never
are
know.
some times
YOLO.
where you go, "Hey, I
YOLO.
can't."
I tried it last year. You never say never to any scenario
You should draft
in a
them all in
fantasy football draft.
trades.
Draft them all. Grab them all. I think I drafted
Never
3
draft a
running
trade.
backs
Never draft a trade.
last year. I'm pretty sure.
Unless you know someone's
I think so.
that desperate to trade, because I've been there and I've seen it.
Stay
You
tuned.
snake
because
you
maybe
snake their pick. You snake their pick, and they're that desperate to get them.
we might actually have some man crushes, which might go a little bit against what we were talking about, but the value will line up. Maybe even get someone's man crush. That's where you can probably do some damage on a fantasy draft day. We're talking about the elite players, the top 30 players right now in fantasy football, the cornerstones of your team. I want to get your guys' thoughts. All right, your pick 2, 3, 4. Who's your number 1 wide receiver? Who do you like in this draft? So Steve just mentioned, well, he might go CD Lamb, number 1 overall. How do you tier the elite receivers right now in the top of the draft? Dragon CD Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'll go to you, Steve. We know you like CD Lamb. What's the pecking order after that?
Well, so the biased Dolphin fan actually likes Tyreek Hill more, but I always say CD Lamb because that's the consensus number 1 wide receiver. I think CD Lamb will have. I think there's a tier that's CD Lamb and Tyreek Hill. So I think you can just say they're the 2 best wide receivers in my opinion.
Are you
They
kind of
both
looking
have
at your
potential
top
to be.
3 is CMC, CD Lamb, and Hill? Kind of that.
Yeah, I think if you get one of those 3 players, you're fantastic, and I think they all have the potential to be the number 1 fantasy player this season. Then it's Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra, and how I have it is Amon-Ra, Jefferson, Chase.
Okay. Yes. But
And I have Amon-Ra clearly ahead of the other 2, but behind CD Lamb and Tyreek Hill. It's the Amon-Ra. He's in his own little class, and then it's Jefferson and Chase. Chase, I want to believe will come back and be good after injury and Burrow coming back. And Jefferson, I'm believing in the talent, but I don't necessarily know what we're getting out of the quarterback.
yeah,
That's kind of where I have a hard time with Jefferson.
Yeah, I'm pretty much there with you, Steve. I have to agree, and maybe it's because we talked about Amon-Ra a little bit, but you mentioned the questions with the quarterback play for Justin Jefferson, and that is something that I worry about, if it'll really be able to keep his pace, fantasy wise, and if there's going to be bumps and bruises along the way. So for where he's going at in the draft, it is a little concerning. So, but
Yeah, I
Yes.
actually am on board with you, Steve. I like Amon-Ra ahead of Chase and Jefferson. I think I would take Chase after St. Brown, just because of the upside. I'll play the what if game there, because I think there's a higher upside if Burrow's healthy with Chase than Jefferson, and maybe up and down. Even if it's Sam Darnold who wins the job, I think that's still a little bit lower of a ceiling for Jefferson and that offense. And I would be kind of worried if I was like 6 or 7, because there, do you start thinking about, does AJ Brown, does Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams is a player that I have closer to the top 10 than 15 right now. Do you just kind of maybe start thinking about those receivers? Or if you're sitting there, say at 6 or 7, and yeah, it's Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, and it feels like no-brainers, do you start flirting with Gibbs and maybe Bijan Robinson, or pushing up one of those other wide receivers? Or do you say, let's bet on talent? We need to trust talent.
I like to bet on talent, but it's a tough one. It's preference.
So I have AJ Brown close to that end of that Justin Jefferson chase. So I'm okay at 7. For me, it's 8, 9, 10 where I kind of get iffy, right? Like I like AJ Brown. I think he's proven he's still young. He's got that chemistry with Jalen Hurts. He's going to get his yards. So I think AJ Brown could be in that conversation where I would actually be okay if you said, hey, I'm going to take him over Justin Jefferson because I know who his quarterback is. So
Yeah,
I'm okay with that argument. Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, we've had this conversation before. I am nervous about sophomore running backs. They get pushed into the first round sometimes, and doesn't mean they necessarily should be. They're getting drafted off of speculation. Like Bijan is still ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jahmyr Gibbs outperformed him last season.
Yeah, you're talking to RB10 last year, Jahmyr Gibbs, in a backfield that David Montgomery still ate a little bit.
Right.
And so are we expecting Bijan to make huge strides because Kirk Cousins is coming in? What are we doing here with is Jahmyr Gibbs still going to get eaten into a little bit because they want him to be fresh for the playoffs, which is what the coaches said. He wants it to be more of a tandem. So you're nitpicking, granted, but I love the first 8 picks for that reason.
You're nitpicking, but you're also, to your point, Bijan Robinson was RB9. Jahmyr Gibbs was RB10. But you're drafting them at this point to finish in the top 5. And I don't know if that you're going to get that value at that point versus the receivers you could be missing out on. Because I'm looking down and I could easily see Saquon Barkley jump up into that position and it's a little bit better value. Or you could wait on some of the other running backs that are way down the list and maybe a couple of our man crushes. And that, because you're also in that swing area, do we really think, like, with Aaron Rodgers, and there's an unknown, Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers are both coming off Achilles injuries, and we're asking a whole lot of them to sustain. Because you look at Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson right now, are swing picks. That's a lot of pressure on Aaron Rodgers and the Jets in 2 very valuable positions right there right now. Breece Hall sitting there at 9th overall, and Garrett Wilson at 11.
Yeah, I'm not a Jets fan. I think we are counting on a 40-year-old injured quarterback coming off an Achilles injury to produce a top 10 wide receiver and Breece Hall's being drafted as a top 2 running back, which is possible.
Yeah,
it's a little bit easier to swallow with Breece Hall, but Garrett Wilson's like it's a kind of a big trap in my opinion. So it's like,
Garrett Wilson won't draft for me this season where he's at.
Yeah.
He won't end up on my team because he'll end up on every team in the end of the first, beginning of the second, and I won't touch him till the end of the second, early third at the earliest for me. So.
Well, let's get into that, the top of the second round, because right now looking, of course, Fantasy Pros ADP, I'll throw that on the ticker right there. You see the second round, and it is people is thinking that Garrett Wilson is going to be Devontae Adams 2.0 for Aaron Rodgers, that Drake London is immediately going to form a connection with Kirk Cousins and take off. Marvin Harrison Jr. at 14.
He is up there.
So to me, I'm looking at the top of the second round. I like the wide receivers at the back end of the second round. Those are the guys that I have rated higher. Like Devontae Adams, if he's there for me, if I'm picking at 11 or 12, he's my pick. Like he is the first receiver. Like he might even sneak into 9 or 10 for me.
Yeah, if he's there, that's a slam pick.
Because I think Devontae Adams saw it last year. He had some spike games in that offense, but Aiden O'Connell is, has trust from that coaching staff. Antonio Pierce, Luke Getsy is new offense coordinator coming over from Chicago. We know Gardner Minshew is in competition for that role. Gardner Minshew can keep players fantasy relevant, and you have an outright number one target. Like, I'm still a fan of Devontae Adams, whether it's O'Connell or Minshew, and he's actually a guy that I'd push up over those wide receivers in the second round, actually flirting with into the first round. And the same thing goes for, Chris Olave with Derek Carr throwing him passes. And you mentioned that name, Jalen Waddle. I would definitely right now flip those wide receiver rankings in the second round.
Well, and Jonathan Taylor is another player. I know we're talking about receivers, but Jonathan Taylor, I think, he's fallen a little too far too, right? He was the number one overall pick last season, and he still has that potential. And Anthony Richardson and him should be a deadly combo. So he's actually somebody I have ahead of those other running backs that are on there. I like him more than Breece Hall, and I like him more than Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm willing to let you have the argument about Bijan Robinson, but if I'm picking 8 or 7 or 8, I'm 100% okay with taking Jonathan Taylor too.
Just think if you're picking, 5, and you come out with Amon-Ra St. Brown and like Devontae Adams, I'm ecstatic.
Me too.
I think you're talking about setting yourself up fantastically going into the season. Is there anyone, Taylor? I'm a little cooler on Jonathan Taylor in that offense, just value wise of the running backs. I think it's good. I'd be, it's nitpicking, right? We're talking about building your team in the top 30. I don't like Jonathan Taylor in the second round. I don't think I'd take any running back right now in the second round. I think that's an area like you need to come away with one of the top 10 to 15 wide receivers.
Yeah, if I'm drafted, I think the thing that I'm always kind of thinking about, right? If I end up with, let's say I have the second overall pick and I end up with CeeDee Lamb, and then Jonathan Taylor's still sitting there, I have no problem taking him, knowing that I will get one of the two receivers I really covet after. Or, if Jonathan Taylor's still sitting there and the guy in front of me, I was 2, they took CMC, then I probably will take a receiver and grab Jonathan Taylor on the way back. I just think I understand why you're cool on him. I know a lot of people are. I think we're going to see him come back full training camp in a great offense. I think he could produce big numbers this season. So I actually have him with the potential to be the number 1 running back.
Yeah, I think a good kind of comparison is Gus Edwards scored double-digit rushing touchdowns for the Ravens last year. And I think at times with running quarterbacks, you can just assume that they're going to score, like they're going to eat away at some of the touchdowns. I think Taylor has that potential in that offense because that with Anthony Richardson, if they move the football down the field, I think if you're getting to that point in the second round, I want to at least guarantee myself one more bite of the top tier receivers. But that's what this episode is about. We're throwing different strategies out there. We're looking at it, differently. And I think the second round is going to be fascinating because, these rankings are going to shift up a bit.
Yeah.
But I don't think Marvin Harrison
early.
Jr. is going anywhere. I think people are just falling in love with him. He's going to stay high. I could see maybe Drake London coming down a bit, and then maybe some of the household names like Devontae Adams go back up. I want to get you guys' thoughts on Nico Collins and especially Brandon Ayuk. Because Ayuk, it's been a lot of noise over the last couple of weeks. He's had meetings with the 49ers. They're not trading him, but then he's flirting on social media, saying they don't want me. And then he's going on podcasts saying, I'd like to play in Washington or Pittsburgh. And it's a guy that was 7th in the NFL in receiving yards last year, had 7 touchdowns, is in an explosive offense. But is he someone we trust? Or is this a bounce back for Debo? Because, looking at the back end guys, he's someone that kind of not in on Ayuk. But is this one where, I'll go to you, Aaron, that when the season starts, kind of all this stuff fades away and he becomes that player that we saw him be last year, was top 10 in receiving yards in the NFL.
Yeah, that situation, I'll use it kind of as an example. Previously we went through this with Mike Williams or excuse me, Mike Evans and in Tampa, and there's, is Chris Godwin going to be the guy now? All that stuff, and look at how things went with Mike Evans, and if Ayuk's there and Ayuk's playing, he produces, but the problem with trust is, it's not really there. So I've I've made that decision looking at, like Mike Evans and a Chris Godwin sitting there, and I went with Godwin over Evans, and it's still fine. So it's like going Debo would probably be what I would do, but is it the wrong thing? Because Mike Evans had bounced back and he was, great, and that can happen with Ayuk, but if he ends up somewhere else, who really knows? Like with Pittsburgh, I don't know if how that would be. As Pittsburgh's kind of a little bit
Yeah,
in
he still
flux.
probably has the best ceiling right now in that the San Francisco offense, but he's actually being drafted as the wide receiver 14, and he finished as wide receiver 14 last year, so it's almost equal value at the end of the year.
Right.
249 points PPR league, 75 receptions, 1,300 yards, 7 touchdowns, which right behind him was Debo Samuel. I want to throw Nico Collins at you, Steve, with what he and CJ Stroud did last year. Stephon Diggs is in town. Do you think Nico Collins kind of holds on to the number one target in that offense? And do you like his value there at the end of the second round, knowing what Houston can do and expecting maybe an overall offense to be even a little bit better this year?
Well, I like Nico Collins a lot. I don't think his value holds there, right? I don't think he's going to be at the end of the second round. If he is, I'm probably not going to draft him. I'd rather take Stephon Diggs at the end of the third or 30th overall. So yeah, the end of the third, beginning of the fourth, because I don't know who's going to be number one. Nico Collins got paid, but they traded for Stephon Diggs. I would like to get a part of that offense, but I'd like to get the later part of that offense. So I think I'd rather take Stephon Diggs if value stayed the same. Which I could see Stephon Diggs moving ahead of Nico Collins, then I'm going to take Nico Collins, because I do think they both have good seasons this year. But if I'm sitting there looking at, Mike Evans and Nico Collins and Brandon Ayuk and Debo Samuel, Nico Collins is probably at the bottom part of that little list, not the top part, which is where he's being drafted right now.
Yeah, another player in there, right there in that mix, Chris Olave was wide receiver 16 last year, 87 receptions, 5 touchdowns. He's someone that I do like in that. I think he's going to flirt with 85 to 90 receptions, which I'll take all day, every day in a PPR league. It's a solid, not spectacular offense, but you know what you're going to get if Derek Carr is out there. They flashed some better potential at the end of last season. He's the clear-cut number one option, even with in the passing, even Kamara getting his dump off. So I like Olave a lot in that second round. And again, it's just kind of my trend of kind of flipping. I like the veteran guys still a little bit more than some of those young names like Marvin Harrison Jr. But if you start to get in that third round, that's where you see Debo Samuels, Mike Evans. So let's go. You had 5, 15, 25. What are you looking at there in the third round? Is that I'm gonna throw the scenario to you first, Steve. All right, let's say you went. Let's just say you were 5.
Okay.
And you went wide receiver.
Yep.
You're down there, and you kind of seeing the way things are playing out, 21 to 30. Are you just going all in and taking one last bite at that wide receiver apple, or is that where you say, hey, did any of these running backs fall, or is there someone I can go grab?
So there's 3 running backs in that 20 to 30 range that I love. Like, would love getting in the third round. So if I end up with, let's just say, based off of ADP, I get Amon-Ra because he's the 6th wide receiver and he's who I clearly like the most. 15, Devontae Adams, is sitting there, or Brandon Ayuk or somebody along those lines that we talked about that we all like. Take him. If I'm sitting there and I can have that choice between Saquon Barkley, Devon Achane, and Kyron Williams, I'm taking one of those guys over the wide receivers in that range, which are DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs. I do love Cooper Kupp, but I'd still, in the scenario where I've taken two really good wide receivers, I would love to get running backs that I would consider top 10. Right. So getting one of the top 10 running backs on my list with two amazing wide receivers, knowing that picking at 30, I can probably get another good wide receiver that I like. And that's where I feel like after Kyron, there's kind of a drop off. Maybe Derrick Henry's in that range, but there is a drop off after Derrick Henry that I just don't love the running backs as much until later. That running back dead zone, as they call it, every year.
Yeah, that in the third round, it would get me thinking. Someone has been over wide receivers. If Saquon Barkley is sitting there versus a Cooper Kupp, a DJ Moore, Devontae Smith, like I'm going Barkley over all those guys. They only, like I think Metcalf, like Evans and Metcalf, I would debate versus Saquon Barkley. But there's not a lot right now when I look at third round ADP that I say I have to go with one of these wide receivers. Now, speaking of rookie wide receivers, we see Marvin Harrison Jr. right now sitting at 14th overall. Malik Neighbors, the wide receiver that went after Marvin Harrison Jr. drafted the New York Giants, is sitting there at 24. And Aaron, I don't know if I can bite on that value of Neighbors there in the third round.
There's no way from me. It's like it's not a pick that I'd be looking at. And honestly, at that spot, Steve touched on it, but me, there's a lot of running backs. Kyron Williams. There's even, you could even reach a little bit. My guy there, Derrick Henry's little bit of a reach, but he's down there looking at these rankings. I don't like Neighbors that high, but I don't know.
Well,
I don't know.
and the Giants are on Hard Knocks this season, right? So, like, Neighbors is gonna shoot. Like, I don't think we see Neighbors move as much as we think he should.
Yeah.
Like somebody will
about that.
Every year, somebody falls in love with one of these guys on Hard Knocks, and Neighbors will be the pick because he's gonna be the guy they watch. It's just what it's gonna happen. So I don't think Neighbors falls as much as we believe he should.
I think that there's a lot of hype around the rookie wide receivers. There's a lot of hype around the receivers in general. And I know, Steve, that's something that you were mentioning is, have we gone too far in the fantasy football world of suppressing running backs?
Yeah, I think the hate has. We've done a pendulum swing, and it's what we saw it last season, and it'll always happen, right? Last season, quarterbacks got pushed up way earlier, second, third round, and this year we're seeing it swing back to kind of normal, right? We're seeing it regress to the mean. This season, because running backs were so bad last season, we're seeing the opposite, where everybody's like, I got to get receivers. Well, that pendulum's going to swing again, and I think you don't want to go. We've talked about going wide receiver or zero running back. I don't think you want to go 100% zero running back, especially in that third round when you're looking at some of those running backs that are sitting there. Take them. Like, don't mess on value once you see players you really, really like, because once you start to look at the wide receivers going in that range, we're talking wide receiver 20 to, let's say wide receiver 30, and we haven't even seen the 10th running back come off the board. You're still going to need running backs. Like, I want to get some at that point. So in a lot of scenarios, like we were talking about, if I'm picking fifth, I have no problem going wide receiver, and then going running back, and snatching up, Kyron or Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, some of those guys, and then stealing Travis Etienne or Isaiah Pacheco, and just being like, hey, I have two really good running backs, I have two really good receivers. the difference between like Zay Flowers and Christian Kirk is probably marginal compared to the difference between Travis Etienne and then who are you looking at that point? I don't even see James Cook or Joe Mixon, like Rashad White. That's who you start to look at running back wise. You start to get to the split backfields once you hit that running back 12, 13, where
I think there's some awesome values though. Like you're saying, is I think Henry and Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley in the third round.
Yeah,
like I'm all about. Like I'm sitting there debating, kind of based on where I fall in the third round. You know, if it kind of plays out, because you assume probably a lot of people in your league are going to kind of follow their printouts and ADPs. Like to me, in that third round, I'm looking at Mike Evans, DK Metcalf, Barkley, and Henry, and just trying to figure out, all right, which one of those four falls to me.
Yeah, and I love Mike Evans. He's a player I just kind of want to keep drafting because he's going to get 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. Just feels like that's Mike Evans.
1,000-yard season every year in his career, and it's one of those guys. I used to say it all the time with like the Spurs, and when it was Duncan, Parker, and Ginobili, it's like like once I see those guys like in a wheelchair, I'll stop thinking that they can win playoff series.
Yeah.
Like okay, and with Evans, like I'll go down with that ship. I'll be late on Mike Evans.
Well, I've been early on him the last 2 years, and it's bit me in the butt. I'm like, I'm done. I'm not gonna. I don't doubt your talent anymore.
Yeah,
yeah, I know, right?
And there's some guys like, all right, go down with the ship, especially in the third round, and then he could end up being your wide receiver 3 on your team. And that's another thing to look at too when you're trying to find value in building your team. And at the end of the day, you want to have fun in fantasy football. You want to beat your friends. You want to destroy them. But also go with what you want to do. Like put a roster together where you want to look at it. And the easiest way to talk about fantasy football is through rankings and how people are drafting fantasy football teams and what they're doing. But I also like to think about it too as just a clean slate of wide receiver 1, 2, 3, RB1, RB2, simple things like that of how your team is going to look on a weekly basis. And you're looking at some of these fantasy cornerstones. These could set you apart. If you can hit on these guys in the top 30, then that's going to give you an advantage when it comes to the waiver wire, when it comes to the season. Because we know, we've all been there, someone gets hurt. You miss on one of these guys. But if you can lock in to be, two of these top 30 that they legitimately give you that value, it's a game changer. That's what you have to do because we're not guessing on talent at this point in the draft. It's just trying to peg the right one. And I hope this discussion kind of gets you thinking a little bit about different ways to approach your draft, ways to attack it.
It is important to note we are guessing a little bit with Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors. Like those are guesses.
And that's what we've talked about. Is like those are guys that we're probably not buying into at that value.
And Drake London is kind of the same boat, right? Like
that's
these
why
are players
that whole offense.
Yeah, so sometimes it's okay. I've always thought your first round pick is your home run, like what he is. But my second and third round, I kind of want to play it safe. Like I want a high ceiling but a really low floor. I'm okay if my second and third round picks are not the ones getting me 40 points. I hope they can, but I'm okay if they're not.
High floor?
Yes.
Sorry, yes, high floor. High floor and a low ceiling. Like if they're not getting me more than 20, okay. But if they're always getting me 12, I'm happy. I just don't want the guy who's like, oh, he'll get me 50. Oh, he got me 2.
Yeah,
like
right.
Those weeks where you get 2, probably going to lose you games. And if they're not consistently at least getting 10,
crushes
it's really a loss. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's just keep an eye on it. Training camps coming, injuries are going to change things. But I think when you look at what we're seeing, I think it's going to hold pretty steady. With what we've seen so far in the top 30, I think the third round can definitely shake out. I think some marquee players once more and more people start drafting. And again, we're using Fantasy Pros ADP, the consensus rankings, because it kind of takes from multiple fantasy platforms. So I think it's a good way to present things for people that are using Yahoo or ESPN or CBS Sports, Sleeper across the board. I think that's where we'll see a shakeup. I think the brand names work their way back up, especially in that third round when it's Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, DK Metcalf, Mike Evans. I think they make that push back up to the top. But I think, Steve, we're kind of on that same page. Is I look at the second round kind of the same way. It's like I am not reaching on Drake London, Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, give me Devontae Adams, Chris Olave, like a Jalen Waddle, guys that I'm expecting that sailing from.
Right.
All day.
Yeah, you know their name and you know what it comes with. That's really what it is.
Well, the other thing you have to remember is ADP will shape out how your platform ranks it, right? Because when we get into a draft, if you're not doing an in-person draft, which I always recommend, if you're doing a draft on a computer and you're using Yahoo's default rankings, that's what you're going to default to. So you might have a player rated way higher, but Yahoo has them way down on the list. That player's ADP is going to fall because of the platform you're drafting on. So always keep that in mind too. I still say draft them. Who cares if Yahoo gives you an F at the end of your draft? Like, just draft who you want.
I know we all wait for those grades to come in, but
yep.
It's the best.
Yeah, so just have definitely a strategy of multiple players at different positions and look at it. Say, if you know where you're picking, run through a couple scenarios using our rankings, go down and grab a batch of players that you like at these different things. I really love the discussion we did earlier, talking about the number one overall pick and the different ways you can attack that, because Christian McCaffery, I think, is going to be the consensus number one overall pick. But you got to think about the time in between picks. Steve brought up a very good point about maybe thinking CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill at 1, because if you wait so long, you miss out on getting a bite of that, top tier wide receiver, which you need. Like, you need at least one of those guys on your team. And then also thinking about what to do in the third round. If you go wide receiver, those running backs definitely become interesting in round 3 when you see a name like Saquon Barkley and Devon Achane, the explosiveness in that Miami backfield, and Kieran Williams, Derrick Henry are guys I think are going to be consistently going in the third round. We talk about being open. We talk about moving, but there are players we fall in love with. It's man crush time. Players that you want, maybe the value's involved, maybe you're going to take them a round or two before they actually go. And let's start with quarterbacks, and I'm going to throw it to you, Steve. Your man crush quarterback.
My man crush quarterback is Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy last season finished as the 6th quarterback overall, and he's being drafted as quarterback 13. Now, we expect some numbers to go up, but if I can get a quarterback like Brock Purdy, who I believe will be a top 10 quarterback, and get him past pick 100, so I get my starting quarterback in the 11th or later, I'm stoked, right? That means I got 10, 11 great players before I even had to worry about quarterback. And Brock Purdy is on an offense that we believe will be good. Like, we're saying CMC is going to be good. We think Deebo Samuel is going to be good. We think Brandon Ayuk is going to be good. You're going to draft George Kittle like he's going to be good. Somebody's got to get them the ball. So I love Brock Purdy this season just because where I'm getting it. Like, it's just too good value to not grab a quarterback like.
Aaron, quarterback, man crush. Go.
Quarterback man crush? Well, besides the obvious one, and you guys know me with Minshew, it's actually, I love Jordan Love, and I think Jordan Love's ascending. He's ascending into greatness, and I honestly feel like he is going to be in the top 5 easily. The needle's only pointing, north on him. That offensive-minded coach, things are coming together in Green Bay. They started the last season a little shaky, but towards the end of the season, it looked pretty good. And don't forget, Dallas fan, I'm sure you guys remember how the playoffs were in Dallas for you guys. So Jordan Love's my man crush for quarterback.
Ooh, those are some good ones. I'm going to Dallas. My man crush quarterback is Dak Prescott because in fantasy football, I don't have to worry about playoff games. I don't have to worry about the fact that the Dallas Cowboys haven't been in an NFC championship game in 27, 28 years. To me, it's all about the fantasy production. And I think Dak Prescott in a prove it season, the uncertainty about his contract extension, if I'm getting the QB9 in drafts, 96 overall. So at the end of the 9th round, 10th round, I am comfortable taking a quarterback there. Dak Prescott was QB3 last year. I don't think he's going to be QB3 with the quarterbacks that are getting healthy, some different players, but I'm expecting top 8 easily out of Dak Prescott going QB9. And we can flirt with MVP status. Yeah, Dak Prescott, give me the Cowboys quarterback in fantasy football all day, every day. And that's the one thing where it's fantasy versus reality. I don't need to worry about the Cowboys' struggles in the postseason. I don't need to worry about them not winning those games. It doesn't matter to me. But when we move to pass catchers, wide receiver, tight end, Aaron, man crush pass catcher.
My man crush pass catcher is Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams, especially if Minshew becomes the quarterback. Aiden O'Connell, they have, back and forth, they're good together. But I think Devontae Adams is still a star, and I think he's a little undervalued right now. It may change, but Devontae Adams is still Devontae Adams, so he's definitely one I gotta have.
I got big on Devontae Adams. I think he was a player. Last year I took him early. Maybe didn't trust him as much as I should have. I ended up trading him in the season, but he had some big blow up games last year. I think Adams is even going to find more consistency in that offense. That it's one that adding talent to it, I think, opens some things up. Brock Bowers, first round tight end, Jacoby Myers. I'm like the foundation that is there for the
There's
Raiders.
so much.
There is right now actually in Vegas. Steve,
My man crush for wide receivers or pass catchers is Jalen Waddle. I'm even wearing the Waddle House shirt. Jalen Waddle last season was on pace to have 128 targets in his 17 games. He obviously got injured and missed some games, but if we take an average of 0.75 catches for every target, that would have been 96 catches. So he should be on pace to do that again. They just paid him. I'm expecting a big upside from Waddle this season. If he can stay healthy, which I believe he will, I think he has the potential to have 100 catches and 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns, which you're getting him in the end of the second, early third. I love Jalen Waddle this season. I'm going to end up with him on more teams than not because I'm going to end up taking him at the end of the first, early second, because I believe this season is Jalen Waddle season.
Welcome to the Waddle House. Might even be the best football team name this year. My man crush pass catcher is a tight end. It's Dalton Kincaid. You're talking about as a rookie last year, he was tight end 11 in Buffalo, 73 catches, 673 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I think the touchdown numbers go up. I think the catch total has a chance to be in the 80s as the number 1 receiver in that Bills offense. Yeah, I like Keon Coleman, but I can't fall in love with a rookie wide receiver too much when the value is unbelievable. We're talking tight end 5 for Dalton Kincaid, someone you can get early 5th round. And if you play it out, you go 2 wide receivers early, maybe you're up a running back, and then you can get a tight end that I think is a surefire top 5 tight end in the 4th or 5th round. Dalton Kincaid all day, every day. Josh Allen, Kincaid, touchdown numbers through the roof this season. I think that because you saw at the end of last year that Buffalo in that passing game wasn't just based on Stephon Diggs. And, Josh Allen, I think, is a proven quarterback that, he's showing you he's going to be someone that can, rise the tide for everyone. And I think Kincaid, who was a first-round pick, at tight end has that talent, and I love that value there at tight end 5.
Kincaid could end up being tight end 1. Like he was drafted. He was the first tight end drafted. He has the potential, and Sam Laporta had a great season last season. There's no reason Dalton Kincaid couldn't be tight end 1 realistically. So I
think he'll be in that battle.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Tight end 3, and if I'm saying there, 4th, 5th round, I'm comfortable locking in tight end. Even if we do take a step back and say that the position there's more depth, well, I want a guy that could probably finish number 1 at the position in the 4th or 5th round. I do think that's really good value there. All right, Aaron, let's go to the ground. Who you crushing on the ground?
Oh man, it's the king, man. It's Derrick Henry in that offense. Like we already discussed, it's like Gus Edwards had 12 touchdowns last season. Kind of in a little bit of a committee, but I think it's going to be easy for Derrick Henry to hit that, and he's one that I absolutely need to have on my team just because I expect touchdowns from him. It's kind of an easy button in my opinion.
If he's sitting there in the 3rd round, I think the 3 of us in the league we're in, I'm going to be looking. I'm going to be looking at the 3rd round, going, I know who we all want in this round. So who's going to be able to get him is definitely going to be fascinating there. But we'll go to you, Steve. Who are you man crushing on the ground?
My man crush on the ground is James Conner. James Conner is going in the 10th round, running back 27. He averaged 13 points per game last season with Kyler Murray missing half the season. I think that number goes up. James Conner could end up being a top 10 running back this season. I don't think he has top 5 potential, but he has top 10 if he stays healthy. Even if he doesn't, if I'm getting a running back that has the potential to give me 13 points a game in the 10th round, I'm all for it. Like, that's a flex. That's a great running back too. I love that value, and I'm probably getting him as my RB3 or 4.
I'm crushing on a major disappointment last season, but new digs, explosive offense. It's Josh Jacobs in Green Bay right now. Josh Jacobs going RB12, 55th overall. So one of those running backs that you can wait on, and you're locking in an RB1 and an offense. Matt LaFleur has shown that he'll lean on guys. When Aaron Jones got into a rhythm, we saw a lot of explosive games in the second half of the season, which corresponded with Jordan Love's emergence as a passer, getting everyone involved. I think Josh Jacobs is going to see an uptick in his pass catching ability. He is a 3-down running back. He can be your RB1 on your team, 5th round selection, so you can go in and grab the wide receivers that you want. Maybe even get that starting tight end in the 4th round and have Josh Jacobs sitting there in an offense that is going to keep getting better on a weekly basis. So Josh Jacobs, RB12, he'll be RB1 in my heart. So there's so many good values, man. And I think we're going to spend so much time for the next couple episodes, I think, targeting middle rounds, because I think it's going to be fascinating, the fallout, and especially the discussions that we've had and what you've talked about, Steve, a little bit with the running backs. But hopefully you have some ideas now. Just think about the top 30. It might seem easy when you're drafting these known commodities, but you still need a little bit of a plan, especially at the top of the draft.
Yeah, I agree. And you kind of want to know where the rest of the value players are. I think value players are more important to help dictate your first 3 draft picks, right? Like, if you know there's a lot of running back value later, I can skip on running backs a little bit, make sure I get good pass catchers, or vice versa. If you don't like the running backs, make sure you load up early.
We know what Aaron's doing in the 3rd round. Maybe even 2nd round. You're going to have to take Derrick Henry in the 2nd round, man.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to have to take him now in the 2nd round.
It just depends on where he picks. Like,
it really does. It's like
we're going to snipe Derrick Henry for me in the 3rd round if he's there.
Yeah, if one of us ends up as the top 2 pick or top 3 picks, Derrick Henry's gone right there.
This is a challenge, man. You want to talk fantasy football, share what you like, what you do, but then it comes down to it. And if you're in the same league, like we are, it gets interesting. We'll see. I'll have to watch back some of these episodes as we get closer to the draft. Take some of the things. But it is always fun. So hopefully it gave you some ideas. Just think about even having a strategy with the top 30 players in the draft, where you want to go. Think about it. Run through a couple scenarios in your head. Say, oh, if I go running back in the first round, what does that leave me? And kind of take chunks. If I have a top 3 pick, middle round pick, bottom pick, go through the rankings, give yourself some scenarios. Because as Aaron mentioned, you don't want to find yourself left out in the cold. That's the worst feeling. Clock's ticking down. You don't know where to go. And you just go with the default pick that the fantasy platform gave you. And it's not a good feeling.
Never.
So it has been a lot of fun. Don't forget, follow us on Instagram at 3 Dudes Fantasy Football. We're dropping clips, other stuff there. It's a YouTube show. We thank you for watching us. And as we get closer and closer to drafts, and we're going to get more and more questions. We'll hit a lot of stuff too if you want to submit your stuff. Email address is, what is it, Steve? Oh no, he's got no audio.
He's on mute.
Oh no, it's like a Zoom call all over again, man. 2020 Zoom call. We've lost Steven. It's 3dudesffp@gmail.com. Appreciate you, Steven. Glad you got your crushes in there at the end before the audio went away. Aaron, as always, my man, enjoy your 4th of July holiday. It's 4th of July week.
You too.
Fun. Don't blow a finger off. And everybody,
no kidding.
Give us a like, give us a follow. We're on the Instagram. We're right here, 3 Dudes Fantasy Football Show on YouTube. Until next time, everybody, medical peace and love. Enjoy your holiday.